The hall shimmered with golden glow as hundreds of people gathered under the great chandelier. The event was a celebration of art and hope, a charity evening meant to raise funds for children in need. Soft music filled the air, and laughter echoed between the walls of the old theater. It was one of those nights when everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect to be real. Keanu Reeves stood quietly near the entrance, wearing a simple black suit, his presence calm yet grounding. He was not the kind of man who enjoyed the spotlight. He had attended because the event supported young filmmakers, something close to his heart. His gentle smile greeted every volunteer, and his voice carried warmth when he said thank you to the waiters passing by. To many, he was the most famous guest of the evening, but to him, he was just another human in a room full of stories. Sandra Bullock arrived shortly after, wearing a light blue dress that glowed softly under the chandelier's warm light. When she saw Keanu, her face lit up. She walked over, holding 2 cups of coffee from the catering table. "I knew you'd be hiding here, away from the crowd," she said with a soft laugh. Keanu smiled back. "You know me too well." They stood together watching the stage, where children were rehearsing a short performance before the main event. The theater was full of history. Carved wood, red curtains, and marble pillars gave it a sense of timeless beauty. Above all of it hung the grand chandelier, made of thousands of crystal pieces, sparkling like stars trapped in glass. As the speeches began, everyone turned their attention to the stage. The host spoke about hope, dreams, and the power of kindness. Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. A group of children waved at Keanu and Sandra from the front row. Smiling wide, he waved back, his eyes soft with care. It was a night meant to inspire, and it truly did. But sometimes, the most unexpected moments happen in silence. While most guests were focused on the stage, Keanu noticed something faint, a tiny flicker in the reflection above. The chandelier's shimmer was uneven. A small chain link at the top seemed to tremble with every vibration of music. He blinked once, thinking it might be the light, but when it moved again, his calm eyes focused. Something was wrong. He shifted his weight and glanced up again. The chandelier hung heavier on one side, swaying slightly though there was no wind. A small sound followed, like the faint crack of glass. He stepped a little forward, scanning the ceiling. No one else seemed to notice. Laughter filled the hall, glasses clinked, and the band started to play again. "Sandra," he said quietly, "look up for a second." She frowned. "Why?" "Just trust me," he whispered. Her eyes followed his, and she froze. One of the metal hooks was bending slightly, almost invisible unless you looked carefully. Her voice went small. "Is that?" "Yeah," he replied softly. "We need to move these people." He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He just began walking toward the nearest group of guests, speaking calmly, pretending it was part of the event. "Everyone, let's take a small step back toward the entrance, please. Just a small change in view. Trust me, you'll see the stage better from there." His tone was gentle but firm. There was something in his eyes that made people listen without question. He started helping an elderly couple stand up, smiling to keep them calm. But before they could move far, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the hall. It was quick, almost like a snap. The music stopped. Time froze. Everyone's eyes lifted upward in confusion. Then it happened. The chandelier dropped slightly before the chain caught again, swinging in slow motion. Gasps filled the air. The glow of the crystals scattered wildly across the walls. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm, her breath quick. "Keanu, it's falling." Without hesitation, he turned to the crowd. "Everyone down. Stay low. Move away from the center." His voice cut through the panic like a calm wave. He grabbed a nearby table, flipping it gently to shield a few guests under it. Shards began to fall from above, glimmering like rain made of glass. He helped Sandra down, covering her with his coat. The heavy chandelier chain finally gave way with a thunderous sound that shook the floor. Glass exploded everywhere. The once beautiful centerpiece shattered into thousands of pieces, scattering light and dust into the air. Screams echoed through the hall, but beneath all that chaos, his calm voice guided people through the noise. "Stay together. Don't run. Look at me. Breathe. You're safe now." His words were quiet but powerful. They cut through fear. He reached for a frightened child under a chair and lifted her gently, whispering, "You're okay. It's over now." People began to realize something remarkable. Despite the fall, no one was hurt, not a single life lost. The chandelier had crashed near the center aisle, but everyone had already moved aside because of his quick thinking. Sandra looked around in shock, then back at him, whispering, "You saved them." Keanu shook his head. "We saved them." We stayed calm. For a moment, silence returned. The music had stopped, the lights flickered, and dust floated in the air like soft snow. Then, slowly, people began to applaud. It started quietly from one corner and grew louder, spreading through the room like a heartbeat. They weren't clapping for survival, they were clapping for his calmness, his presence, his humanity. But Keanu didn't see it as heroism. He just looked up at the ceiling, eyes filled with quiet gratitude that everyone was safe. "Let's get everyone outside," he said softly, guiding people toward the exit. Even while glass sparkled under his shoes, he stayed calm, helping each person one by one outside. Under the cool night air, people hugged each other with trembling hands. Reporters tried to approach him, but he refused attention. He simply said, "The real heroes are the ones who stayed calm and helped each other." The event that was supposed to celebrate hope had just become something even deeper. It became proof that calmness can be stronger than fear. As the emergency lights glowed on the theater's walls, Sandra stood beside him quietly. "You always find peace in chaos," she whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe peace finds us when we remember to care." And under the broken glow of the fallen chandelier, something pure lingered in the air, reminder that one person's calmness can save hundreds from panic. The night that began with light had turned into a lesson of heart, and yet, this was only the beginning of what that night would reveal. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the half-open curtains of the theater lobby. Dust still hung faintly in the air, shimmering like a quiet reminder of what had happened the night before. Workers moved carefully across the floor, sweeping shards of crystal into metal trays. Every step made a faint crunching sound. The smell of burnt wires and spilled wine still lingered. Keanu walked inside early, dressed in the same dark clothes from the night before. He had refused to sleep. Instead, he spent the night helping the cleanup crew and making sure everyone from the event had gone home safely. When he stepped into the main hall, the empty space echoed his footsteps. The chandelier that once symbolized beauty now lay in pieces across the stage. It looked like 1,000 stars had fallen to the ground. He stood there for a long time, silent, looking at the ceiling where the chain had broken. The metal hook was twisted, half-bent. He could almost hear again the sound of the snap, the scream, and the rush of chaos. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath, not of fear, but of gratitude. Everyone was alive. No one had been seriously injured. It felt like a miracle. A voice broke the silence. "You came early." Sandra walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee again. Her voice was soft but tired. "I thought I'd find you here." Keanu nodded slowly. "I couldn't leave it like this." She handed him a cup and looked around. "It looks different without people. Quiet, sad." He took a sip and said, "It'll shine again. Things break, but they can be rebuilt." Sandra looked at him for a moment and smiled faintly. "You always say things like that. Like every broken thing deserves another chance." "Maybe because I've seen people give up too soon," he replied. "Sometimes all it takes is one person who doesn't." For a while, they both stood in silence, listening to the faint sounds of workers outside. One of the theater staff approached nervously, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Reeves, we just want to say thank you. If you hadn't acted when you did, people would have been right under it." Keanu smiled softly. "I'm just glad everyone's okay." "Still," the man said, "people are calling you a hero online. Social media is full of it. Someone posted a video of you helping people out. Millions of views already." Keanu sighed lightly. "Then maybe use that attention for something good. Make sure the workers who built this place get support. This theater is old. It needs care, not blame." The staff member nodded, surprised by his words. "That's very kind of you." As he walked away, Sandra turned to him with a half smile. "You know, you could have just said thank you and gone home like everyone else." Keanu looked back at the broken chandelier. "I don't like leaving things broken, especially when they still have meaning." Later that day, an investigation team arrived. They examined the ceiling, the chain, and the old structure that had supported the chandelier for decades. After hours of measuring and discussing, one engineer walked over to Keanu and Sandra. "The chain was corroded from the inside," the engineer said. "Years of humidity and no proper maintenance. No one could have seen it." Keanu nodded quietly. "So it wasn't anyone's fault?" "No," the engineer replied, "but it could have been worse. That thing weighed hundreds of pounds. You saved them by moving the crowd. He looked uncomfortable at the word saved. He never liked that kind of praise. I didn't save them, he said calmly. I just noticed what others didn't. The engineer smiled. Sometimes noticing is everything. By evening, the theater director arrived, looking worried. The event had been a disaster financially. Sponsors were demanding explanations, and news channels were already circling the story. Some wanted to blame the theater, others the organizers. People were searching for someone to point at. But when Keanu walked up to the director, he said something unexpected. Don't let this turn into blame. Turn it into reflection. Repair the ceiling, make it safer, and when it's ready, invite everyone back for free. Show them that fear doesn't destroy beauty. It only reminds us to protect it. The director looked at him as if he had heard something sacred. That's actually beautiful, he said, but how do we pay for that? I'll help, Keanu said simply. Not for the cameras, just to fix what matters. Sandra looked at him, speechless for a moment. You really never stop, do you? He smiled faintly. When people are scared, the easiest thing is to walk away. The hardest is to come back and make them feel safe again. That night, as news channels played clips of the fallen chandelier, a different video began to trend. It was shaky phone footage of Keanu guiding people out of the hall, calming them, covering a child with his coat. Millions watched it with tears in their eyes. The caption read, "When chaos came, calmness saved us." Comments flooded in. His voice made me feel safe just hearing it. We need more people like him in the world. True kindness doesn't need noise, but Keanu never read those. He spent the night at the theater again, helping rebuild the ceiling, handing tools, clearing glass. He wasn't a construction worker, but he believed presence had its own kind of healing. The workers were tired, some embarrassed that the accident had happened. Keanu knelt beside one of them, a man in his 50s with worn hands and a heavy heart. "Sir, we should have checked better," the man said quietly. "If anyone had died, I'd never forgive myself." Keanu put a hand on his shoulder. "No one died. That means you still have a chance to make things stronger. You're not responsible for what broke, but you are part of what will make it safe again." The man looked up with watery eyes and nodded. That moment stayed with him for life. Outside, the city lights reflected on the theater windows. It was quiet, peaceful. Sandra walked out and leaned against the doorframe, watching Keanu speak to the crew. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, "Some people heal others just by being near them." By midnight, the hall was clean, and the chandelier pieces were packed in boxes. Keanu sat down on the empty stage, tired but thoughtful. He looked up at the ceiling where the light used to be and said softly, "Even in pieces, it still reflects light." That night, the internet might have called him a hero, but he knew the truth. Heroes were not the ones who acted without fear. They were the ones who chose calmness even when fear was loud. And somewhere in that quiet hall, surrounded by broken glass that still shimmered faintly in the moonlight, Keanu realized something deeper. What had fallen was not just a chandelier. It was a reminder of how fragile moments can be, and how easily panic can destroy peace unless someone stands still and reminds others to breathe. He had been that reminder once, but he didn't know yet that the true test of calmness was still waiting ahead. The sun had barely risen when people began gathering outside the old theater. Cameras, microphones, and flashing lights filled the street. Reporters wanted a statement. Fans wanted to thank Keanu. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some called it a miracle, others called it luck. But Keanu himself stayed inside, away from the crowd. He didn't want attention. He only wanted the people who had been there to feel peace again. Sandra found him sitting near the broken chandelier pieces, quietly sorting them by shape. "You're still here?" she asked softly. He nodded without looking up. "I thought if we rebuild it piece by piece, maybe it'll mean something again." She smiled gently. "You can't fix everything yourself." "Maybe not," he said, "but I can start." The theater had been closed to the public since the incident. Only staff and volunteers were allowed inside. The air smelled of cleaning chemicals and wood dust. In the distance, the faint sound of hammers echoed. Keanu worked alongside them, lifting boxes, sweeping debris, and offering water to the workers. He never gave orders, only helped quietly, and that calm energy made everyone around him move with more care. In the middle of the day, the theater manager entered, holding a small envelope. "Mr. Reeves," he said carefully, "you've received this from one of the families who attended the event." Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note in a child's handwriting. It said, "Thank you for not letting me be scared. When you said breathe, I did, and I wasn't afraid anymore." Beneath the message was a small drawing of the chandelier and a stick figure with a kind smile helping people. For a moment, Keanu didn't speak. He folded the note gently and put it in his pocket. "That's all that matters," he said softly. As the day went on, more letters arrived at people writing about how his calmness had saved them from panic. One woman wrote that she had been paralyzed with fear, unable to move. But when she saw him helping others with quiet assurance, she felt safe. Another wrote that she used to believe kindness was weakness, but that night changed her view forever. Meanwhile, outside the story had gone viral. News anchors spoke of his calm leadership, psychologists analyzed his behavior, and fans called it the night of light and calm. But what touched people most was how he refused to take credit. Every reporter who asked for an interview was met with the same reply: "Talk to the people who helped each other. That's where the real story is." That evening, Sandra came back with a group of volunteers. They brought flowers to place near the theater's front steps as a sign of gratitude. Among them was the same little girl who had written the letter. She held a small flower bouquet with trembling hands. When she saw Keanu, her eyes widened. "You're real," she said shyly. He smiled gently. "I think so." She handed him the flowers. "These are for you. My mum said you made us safe." Keanu knelt down to her level. "You know what made you safe?" he said softly. "You listened. You stayed calm. That's something even grown-ups forget to do." The girl nodded proudly. Her mother, standing nearby, wiped her eyes. Later, when everyone left, Sandra sat beside Keanu on the theater steps. "You could have walked away," she said quietly. "Most people would have." "Walking away doesn't fix fear," he replied. "If people only remember the accident, they'll carry fear with them. But if they remember that everyone stayed calm and safe, they'll carry peace instead." As night fell, the sound of rain began to patter softly against the theater's roof. It was gentle, rhythmic, soothing. Keanu looked up at the sky. The water reflected on the cracked marble floor, and for a brief moment, it looked like stars had returned to the ground, like the chandelier's light was shining again through the rain. Just then, the theater's electrician, a young man named Liam, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Reeves, can I ask you something?" "Sure," Keanu said. Liam rubbed his hands nervously. "Last night, when it felt, how did you stay calm?" "I froze. I couldn't move." Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "I think calmness isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling it and still choosing to act with care. Fear wants you to react fast. Calmness asks you to breathe first." Liam nodded slowly, repeating his words under his breath, as if trying to memorize them. "Breathe first." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll remember that next time something goes wrong. It's like training the mind to listen before it speaks." Later that night, Sandra and Keanu walked outside together. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and shining under the streetlights. Reporters had gone home, the city had gone quiet, and the world seemed to pause. "Do you think the chandelier will ever hang again?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "But even if it doesn't, it already did something greater." "What's that?" "It taught people that beauty can fall and still leave light behind." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of dripping water from the theater's edge filled the silence. In the distance, a child's laughter echoed faintly. A small sound in a big city, but it felt like hope. Sandra looked at him quietly. "You always see something meaningful in everything, don't you?" He smiled slightly. "Maybe because everything has meaning if you look long enough." As they walked away from the theater, Keanu's phone buzzed. It was a message from the event organizers. They were planning to host a second charity event, this time outdoors, to rebuild the theater and honor the people who stayed calm that night. They wanted him to give the opening speech. Keanu read the message slowly. He didn't like speeches. He wasn't someone who enjoyed attention, but this one wasn't about fame. It was about healing, about turning fear into strength. He looked at Sandra and said softly, "Maybe it's time to remind people that calmness is not silence, it's strength." And somewhere deep inside, he knew the next event would test not just the theater's strength, but his own heart again. Because sometimes life repeats lessons to see if you've truly learned them. Weeks passed, and the old theater began to transform. The walls were cleaned, the cracks were repaired, and the workers rebuilt the structure with quiet pride. Every screw, every wire, every piece of glass was placed with extra care. The chandelier's pieces had been collected, washed, and stored safely in boxes. No one was sure if it would ever hang again, but it had already become a symbol of hope. Outside, banners were hung announcing the second charity event. This time it would be held in the open courtyard under the night sky. People called it the Night of Calm. The news spread everywhere. Hundreds of guests were expected, including the same families who had survived the fall. What made the event special was that it wasn't organized for fame or promotion. It was a gathering to honor human kindness. On the evening of the event, the courtyard sparkled with soft lights and lanterns. Gentle music played from a small stage. People spoke quietly, laughing, sharing stories of how that night had changed them. Some said they learned to value patience. Others said they learned to care more deeply. Keanu arrived quietly, dressed in a simple dark jacket. There were no guards, no grand entrances. He greeted everyone the same way, with a handshake, a nod, and a small smile. When he walked through the crowd, people turned, not to cheer, but to show gratitude. They remembered his voice, his calm, his presence. Sandra joined him, radiant yet humble in a plain white dress. She smiled at the children running around with paper lanterns. "You did it," she said softly to Keanu. "Look at them. They're not afraid anymore." "That's the point," he replied. "They came back to the same place that scared them. That takes courage." A small stage was set near the rebuilt theater entrance. Keanu was invited to speak. He stepped up slowly, the crowd falling silent. The air was cool, filled with the scent of flowers and the sound of a soft breeze. Cameras flashed, but he ignored them. He looked at the faces before him, some old, some young, some still carrying memories of fear, and began speaking in his calm, steady voice. "Fear comes fast," he said gently, "but peace takes time." That night, we all faced fear together. We heard it, we felt it, but we didn't let it take us apart. We chose to care. That's what made everyone safe. Not me, not one person, but all of us, together. The crowd listened in silence. His voice carried through the air, soft yet strong. "When something breaks," he continued, "we can choose to walk away or rebuild. I've learned that rebuilding isn't just about walls or ceilings. It's about hearts. When we stay calm, we remind others that fear doesn't last forever." A quiet applause followed, but before it could grow, a sudden gust of wind blew across the courtyard. One of the lantern poles tilted dangerously, the heavy light fixture swinging over the crowd. A few people gasped as it began to tip. And in that instant, everyone remembered. People started to move back quickly, fear flashing in their eyes. But Keanu stepped down from the stage and raised his hand. His voice, steady as before, carried through the air. "Stay calm. Step back slowly. Look around you. Help the person next to you." His tone wasn't commanding, it was reassuring. Sandra quickly joined him, guiding children away from the tilting pole. Volunteers rushed forward, grabbing the ropes. Within seconds, the lantern was caught and secured again. No one was hurt. No one panicked. The crowd froze for a moment, realizing what had just happened. Then, a wave of calm spread among them, like a shared breath of relief. Applause erupted, not out of excitement, but out of respect for the calm that had saved them once again. The host, visibly shaken, whispered to Keanu, "How did you stay so composed?" Again he smiled faintly. "Because calmness only works when you practice it. Fear doesn't disappear. It listens to those who speak quietly." As the evening continued, something magical began to happen. One by one, people walked to the front of the courtyard to share how that night, weeks ago, had changed their lives. A teacher said, "I used to shout when things went wrong. Now I stop, breathe, and think before I speak. My students notice." A father said, "That night taught me that protecting people isn't about strength. It's about staying grounded when others can't." Even one of the theater workers spoke. "Mr. Reeves didn't just help us that night. He came back every day to rebuild with us. We didn't just fix the ceiling, we fixed something in ourselves." Sandra watched the scene with tears in her eyes. She turned to Keanu and whispered, "This is bigger than a chandelier now. You've started something." He shook his head gently. "No, they did. They found calmness inside themselves. I just reminded them it was already there." The night went on beautifully. People lit candles and placed them around the courtyard, forming a circle of light. The air shimmered softly, reflecting the glow on everyone's faces. Music began again, this time a slow, peaceful tune played by the same children's orchestra that had performed during the first event. Keanu looked up at the sky. filled with soft lanterns floating upward like tiny stars. Sandra stood beside him and said quietly, "Do you ever think about what could have happened if you hadn't seen the chandelier move that night?" He paused, then said, "Sometimes, but thinking about what could have happened takes away the beauty of what did happen. Fear didn't win. That's enough." As the final song played, the director of the theater stepped up and announced something unexpected. "Thanks to generous donations, the chandelier will be restored and rehung next month. It will be renamed The Light of Calm in honor of what this community learned together." The crowd cheered softly, tears shining in their eyes. Keanu smiled quietly, looking down, humbled by the emotion surrounding him. He never wanted his name attached to the act, but hearing that the light would represent calmness filled him with peace. When the event ended, he helped clean up again, picking up cups and folding chairs while others rested. Sandra walked beside him, laughing softly. "You're the only man who gives a speech, saves a crowd, and still stays behind to clean chairs." He chuckled gently. "Maybe it's just my way of saying thank you." The courtyard slowly emptied. Only a few lanterns flickered in the night wind. Keanu stood for a moment, looking at the repaired theater. The moonlight reflected softly on its windows. He whispered to himself, "Safety isn't just about strong walls, it's about gentle hearts." And in that quiet moment, as the last light swayed softly above, he didn't know that one final surprise awaited him, something that would turn the next day into an even deeper lesson about humanity, respect, and the true meaning of calm. The morning after the second event, the theater was filled with quiet laughter and soft conversation. The courtyard still smelled of candles and flowers. Sunlight touched the broken chandelier pieces that were now kept safely inside glass boxes. For most people, the story had ended beautifully, but for Keanu, something about that night still lingered in his heart. He felt there was more to understand, more to uncover. As the cleanup ended, one of the older workers, a man named Roberto, approached Keanu with hesitant eyes. He looked nervous, holding his cap in both hands. "Mr. Reeves," he began softly, "I need to tell you something. About the first night the chandelier fell." Keanu turned toward him calmly. "Go ahead," he said gently. Roberto took a deep breath. "I was part of the team that inspected the ceiling a week before the event. I saw a small crack in the chain, just a hairline. I told my supervisor, but he said we didn't have enough time to replace it before the gala. He said the chandelier had survived for years, and it would hold one more night. I wanted to fix it. I really did, but I listened to him." His hands shook slightly. "After the accident, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking, what if someone had died because I stayed quiet?" Keanu looked at him, not with anger, but with deep understanding. "Thank you for telling me," he said softly. "It takes courage to admit something like that." Roberto's eyes filled with tears. "I should have done more." "You did something now," Keanu replied. "You told the truth, and that truth will make this place safer. That matters." He placed a comforting hand on Roberto's shoulder. "We all make choices, some out of fear, some out of pressure. What defines us isn't the mistake, it's how we choose to face it later." Roberto lowered his head, whispering, "I wish I had your calm that night." Keanu smiled faintly. "That calm doesn't come from never being afraid. It comes from knowing fear can't make the final decision." A silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Roberto's tears fell quietly, but his heart felt lighter. Later that afternoon, Sandra arrived with coffee, as she always did. She noticed Keanu sitting near the chandelier boxes, lost in thought. "You look like you're carrying the weight of something," she said softly. He nodded slowly. "One of the workers told me he saw the crack before the event." Her eyes widened slightly. "So it could have been prevented." "Maybe," he said, "but blaming him won't change anything. He already blames himself enough." She sat beside him. "So what will you do? Help him forgive himself?" he said simply. "Sometimes forgiveness is the hardest kind of safety." They both sat quietly for a while, listening to the sound of the wind brushing against the theater walls. Keanu looked up at the ceiling, imagining the chandelier hanging again one day, glowing with a new purpose. In the evening, a meeting was held with the organizers, engineers, and staff. Keanu requested to speak briefly. Everyone fell silent as he stood up. "We all want to make sure this never happens again," he said calmly, "but let's also make sure we don't carry fear forever. This theater isn't broken, it's learning, just like us." Then he looked at Roberto and said, Mistakes are warnings life gives us, in gentle form before something worse happens. The fact that no one was hurt means this warning was meant to teach, not punish. The room filled with quiet agreement. Some nodded with tears in their eyes. Even the director, who had been anxious for weeks, looked relieved. After the meeting, a young intern approached Keanu shyly. "Sir, I just wanted to say that night changed how I see people. When the chandelier fell, I thought everyone would run. But they didn't, because you didn't. Now I understand. Calmness spreads faster than fear if someone dares to start it." Keanu smiled softly. "That's the real lesson," he said. "Peace isn't loud, it whispers. But people hear it when they need it most." That night, Keanu and Sandra walked out of the theater into the open courtyard. The moon was full, and the gentle reflection of light touched every repaired wall. Sandra looked up and said, "It's strange, isn't it? A broken chandelier ended up teaching hundreds of people how to stay calm." "Maybe that was its purpose all along," Keanu said quietly. "Sometimes things fall apart not to destroy us, but to remind us what truly holds us together." They stood there silently, surrounded by the soft hum of the city. A cool wind passed, carrying the faint scent of roses from the nearby garden. Sandra smiled and said, "You always turn pain into peace. How do you do that?" He looked at her, his eyes kind but thoughtful. "By remembering that pain is just a messenger. It tells us where we need to bring light." As they turned to leave, Roberto approached once more, carrying a small box. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice steadier now, "we restored one piece of the chandelier. It's not perfect, but I thought you should see it." He opened the box, revealing a single crystal, polished and glowing under the moonlight. Keanu held it gently in his hand. The light inside the crystal shimmered with reflections of blue and gold. "It's beautiful," Sandra whispered. "It's more than that," Keanu said softly. "It's proof that broken things can still reflect light." He handed it back to Roberto. "You should keep it. It'll remind you that even mistakes can shine when you face them with honesty." Roberto nodded, tears returning to his eyes as they walked away. Sandra looked at Keanu and said, "You didn't just make people feel safe, you made them believe in themselves again." He smiled quietly. "Then maybe that's what safety really is." For a long moment, they stood still under the night sky, both looking up at the stars. The courtyard lights flickered softly, mirroring the constellations above. The world seemed at peace again. And somewhere inside that old theater, amid the dust and repairs, something sacred had changed. It was no longer just a place for performances. It had become a symbol of calm, compassion, and the unshakable belief that kindness can hold a crowd safer than any ceiling ever could. A month later, the theater stood ready once more. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, the stage was repaired, and at the center of the ceiling, a new chandelier hung in quiet beauty. It wasn't as grand as before, but it carried more meaning than any gold or crystal ever could. Its name was written on a small silver plaque beneath it, "The Light of Calm." The evening of the reopening arrived. People from the city gathered. Again, many of them the same faces from that unforgettable night. Families held hands. Children smiled without fear. The air felt warm, peaceful, and safe. Keanu and Sandra walked through the entrance together. As they looked up, the chandelier glowed softly above them, casting gentle light that danced across the room. It wasn't just a decoration anymore, it was a symbol of what they had all survived and learned. Before the ceremony began, the theater director invited Keanu to speak. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. His voice was steady, filled with calm strength. "This chandelier is made from the same pieces that once fell," he said. "Each broken part was cleaned and rebuilt by the same hands that once feared it. That's what healing looks like. We can't erase what happened, but we can choose what it means." He paused, looking around at the crowd, then smiled softly. The night it fell, fear could have won, but it didn't, because calmness spread faster, kindness moved faster, and that's why everyone here is still standing today. Applause filled the room, not loud or wild, but deep and emotional. People wiped their eyes, smiling through tears. The new chandelier shimmered above them, reflecting every face like stars in still water. After the speech, Sandra leaned closer to him and whispered, "You didn't just rebuild a chandelier, Keanu. You rebuilt peace in people's hearts." He smiled gently. "We all did. That's what makes it beautiful." As the lights dimmed and music began, the chandelier glowed brighter, scattering warmth across the hall. For a moment, it felt as if time itself stood still. The fear, the fall, the panic of it, had turned into light, and in that golden glow, surrounded by people who had once trembled in fear but now stood proud and calm, Keanu realized something simple yet powerful. True safety doesn't come from walls or chains, it comes from kindness, and kindness, once shared, never falls.